I was a journalist in New York for 12 years at a major newspaper, and when I came here, I decided radio was of interest to me. And I approached Co-op Radio and I said I wanted to start a program that would seek to destigmatize mental illness. It's been on for 3 years now, and we have news, we have a main feature story that deals with mental illness, then we have a personal story. And I think that one really touches people. Hearing about how someone who has a mental illness has dealt with it, and we always try to focus on some of the positive aspects of mental illness, because people with mental illness tend to have a great level of empathy because of what they've gone through. And so we often end our personal stories by asking, what gift have you gotten from having a mental illness? And we usually get wonderful answers about that and how people have really grown.
Due to the fact that 1 in 4 people have at least one mental illness, that means the media know or are related to someone suffering with a mental illness of some sort. I think you should have some compassion and empathy and think first about what they're writing.
When a story focuses on someone who has a mental illness, the story needs to have the big picture. You can't just say, well, I'm just writing about this person who has a mental illness who took out a machete, downtown, and we're just covering that. So we don't need to give a big perspective. No, that's your job as a journalist, to give the whole story. And the story should include some perspective so that your readers walk away knowing more than they knew before they read your article.
People felt like the representations in our newspapers sometimes focused more on the sensational things. So when someone does a crime in our city, all of a sudden it becomes about their schizophrenia. But maybe we need to begin looking at the larger frame. Like, did that person have housing? Were they living in poverty? Were they getting proper treatment? Were they sitting really on the margins of our society and were incredibly isolated?
Within the first paragraph of any story, this poor woman that was murdered in Newton with hockey, they don't even know who it is yet, but this person already has a mental illness. This person that was arrested this morning for that stabbing and carjacking already has a mental illness, and you don't know that. It is the catch-all to be able to phrase everything and to keep everything and to relieve society as a whole.
It turns out, of course, most people who have a mental illness are on the other end. They're the victims of violence, not the perpetrators of violence. That story hasn't really been told, and that story needs to be told.
I think media has to be really careful that when readers who maybe have gotten their information about mental illness from movies like Psycho or One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, that they may not know that that's really unusual. So I think we have to be very careful because so much stigma exists in our society. The new person who wrote that newspaper story maybe didn't mean to convey that meaning to you, but because you've already got those ideas, like you're reading it in a very specific way. So we have to be really careful about how we represent it.
It's also about saying, you know what, we'll do some stories focusing on mental illness and mental health. And right now, I'm on the board of directors of the National Center for Disability in Journalism in the States, and we just gave a $5,000 award for good coverage of mental illness. And so this is really out there to encourage journalists to do a better job in covering mental illness.